Ethan was one of those boys who always thought he knew everything. He walked into the music room that morning with his usual confidence, his head held high, his friends following behind him like shadows. Everyone in the room knew him as the best piano player in school, or at least that's what he believed. He loved the attention, the compliments, and especially the way others looked up to him. When the teacher announced that a new student would be joining their music class, Ethan barely paid attention. He was too busy joking around with his friends, tapping the piano keys loudly and laughing at his own silly tunes. But when the classroom door opened and a small, shy girl walked in, the room suddenly became quieter. She looked nervous, clutching a worn-out music notebook against her chest. Her name was Emma. The teacher smiled kindly at her and said, "Class, this is Emma. She'll be joining us for piano lessons from today." Emma gave a small nod, her eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel everyone's gaze on her. Her clothes were simple, her hair tied back neatly, and she didn't look like the kind of person who would stand out. "Why don't you show us what you can play, Emma?" the teacher said encouragingly. Emma froze for a second. Her hands felt cold, her heart beating fast. She wasn't ready to perform in front of strangers, especially not in front of someone like Ethan, who was already smirking from his seat. Ethan leaned toward his friend Jake and whispered, "This should be good. Let's see if she even knows how to find middle C." Jake chuckled quietly, and the two exchanged a look that said they were already expecting her to fail. Emma walked slowly to the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. She sat down on the wooden bench and placed her fingers carefully on the keys. The piano was old, a little dusty, but she didn't mind. Pianos always felt like home to her, even when people didn't. The class watched in silence. Ethan sat back with his arms crossed, his face full of amusement. He had seen many beginners before, and they usually hit the wrong notes, looked embarrassed, and gave up halfway. He was ready to laugh. Emma took a deep breath and began to play. Her fingers trembled, and the first sound that came out was a soft, uncertain note. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't confident either. Then came another note, slightly off-key. A few students exchanged awkward glances. The sound was uneven, shaky. Someone in the back giggled. Ethan tried to hide his grin but failed. "Told you," he whispered under his breath. Emma's heart sank. She could hear the laughter, feel the eyes judging her every move. Her throat tightened, and for a moment, she wanted to stop. She wanted to run out of the room and never come back. But she didn't. She stared down at the black and white keys, trying to remember the song she had practiced at home so many times. She pressed another note, but this time her finger slipped, creating a loud, unpleasant sound that echoed in the quiet room. A few students couldn't help but laugh. Even the teacher looked uncomfortable. Ethan leaned forward, covering his mouth, pretending to cough to hide his laughter. "Maybe she's tuning it herself," he joked softly to Jake, who burst out laughing. Emma heard that. She felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She straightened her back, took a deep breath, and placed her hands gently on her lap. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. For a moment, nobody spoke. The room was filled with an awkward silence. The teacher, trying to help, said gently, "It's okay, Emma. Everyone gets nervous on their first day." But Ethan couldn't resist one last comment. "Maybe she should start with something simple, like Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," he said with a grin. His friends laughed again, loud enough for everyone to hear. Emma looked up at him then. For the first time, she really looked at him. His confident smirk, his mocking eyes, his body language that screamed arrogance. And in that moment, something inside her changed. The fear that had held her back began to fade, slowly replaced by something stronger, determination. She didn't say a word. She simply nodded, as if silently promising herself that she would make him eat those words one day. She looked down at the piano again, her reflection faintly visible on the polished wood. She placed her right hand back on the keys, her fingers resting on middle C. Her hands were still shaking, but her eyes were steady. The teacher was about to tell her to stop and sit down, but Emma pressed the key softly, and a single note rang out. Clear, gentle, and full of emotion. It wasn't loud, but everyone heard it. Even Ethan's laughter faded as he noticed something different in the way she touched the piano. For a second, the whole room went still. Emma continue playing yet. She just sat there, staring at the keys, lost in thought. To her, the piano wasn't just an instrument. It was a way to speak without words, a way to show everything she felt, but couldn't say out loud. She wanted to prove herself, not to them, but to the voice in her own head that always told her she wasn't good enough. As she sat there, the sound of that one quiet note still echoing faintly in the room, Ethan frowned. He didn't understand why, but something about it made him uneasy. It was as if that single sound carried a secret he couldn't figure out. He didn't know it yet, but the girl he laughed at was about to change the way he saw music forever. Emma sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands still resting gently on the keys. The single note she had played still seemed to hang in the air, faint but alive, like a whisper that refused to fade. Her classmates stared at her, some out of curiosity, others out of disbelief. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his smirk slightly smaller now but still there, waiting for her to fail again. The teacher gave a small, encouraging smile. "Go on, Emma," she said softly. "Just take your time. Play what you feel." Emma nodded slowly. Her heart was still pounding, but something inside her had changed. The laughter still echoed in her ears, but now it didn't sting the same way. It pushed her instead, like a challenge she couldn't walk away from. She closed her eyes for a moment and tried to block out everything, the whispers, the eyes, the pressure. She just focused on the piano. At home, the piano had always been her safe place. Her mother used to sit beside her as she practiced, humming softly to the rhythm. Even when life was difficult, when bills piled up, when her father lost his job, when the house was too cold in winter, the piano was where Emma escaped. She remembered her mother's words clearly. Music doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be honest. She took a deep breath, then very slowly, she began again. Her first few notes were still shaky, uneven, like a bird learning to fly. But this time, she didn't stop. Each note she played seemed to give her a little more courage. The melody started to take shape. A soft, uncertain tune, but with feeling. Her fingers began to move more freely, no longer stiff with fear. Ethan, who had been whispering something to his friend, fell quiet. There was something strange about the way Emma was playing now. It wasn't technically impressive, not yet, but it was different. There was emotion in every sound, as if the piano was speaking directly to the hearts in the room. Still, Emma made mistakes. A wrong note here, a stumble there. Each time it happened, she winced, but didn't stop. The teacher's eyes softened. She could see it, the courage behind the nervousness. See. Then it happened. Emma pressed a wrong key, loud and sharp, breaking the rhythm completely. The sound made everyone flinch. A small burst of laughter came from the back of the class, and Ethan couldn't help letting out a quiet chuckle. "There it is," he whispered. "I knew it was luck the first time." Emma froze again. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling. The laughter hit her like a wave. For a few seconds, her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to disappear, but then she remembered that single note, the first one she'd played that silenced the room. She sat up straighter, wiped her eyes quickly with her sleeve, and pressed her fingers down again. This time, she played just one simple note. It rang out, strong and clear, then another, each one steady and deliberate. The melody changed. It became slower, deeper, more powerful in its simplicity. The teacher leaned forward slightly. Something about the sound felt almost haunting. The room grew quieter again. Even the students who had laughed now stared, confused and fascinated. Ethan's grin faded. He didn't understand what was happening, but for the first time, he wasn't laughing. The way Emma's fingers moved now, it wasn't nervous anymore. It was deliberate, like she knew exactly what she wanted to say through the piano. The notes grew softer, flowing into one another with unexpected grace. The sound filled the room, not loud, not showy, but beautiful in a way that couldn't be explained. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of something real, something that made people listen. Emma's eyes were still closed. She wasn't thinking about her classmates anymore, or Ethan, or even the teacher. She was lost in the music, lost in her own world. Each note carried a memory. Her mother's smile, her father's quiet pride, the long nights she spent practicing alone in a small apartment with thin walls and neighbors why Bo didn't always appreciate her playing. Her fingers danced softly over the keys, painting a story no one in that room had ever heard before. It was a story of fear and courage, of laughter and pain. Every sound came from deep inside her, honest and unfiltered. When she reached the last note, she let it linger. The vibration hummed through the air, through the walls, through every silent heart in that classroom. And then, nothing. Just silence. No one clapped at first. They didn't even know if they were supposed to. It wasn't a performance. It felt like something sacred. Emma opened her eyes slowly. For a moment she didn't dare look at anyone. But when she finally did, she saw something unexpected. The students weren't mocking her. They were staring, wide-eyed, unsure what to say. Even Ethan looked stunned. The teacher smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "That," she said quietly, "was beautiful, Emma." Emma blinked, surprised. "But I made mistakes," she said in a small voice. "Music isn't about being perfect," the teacher replied gently. "It's about making people feel something, and you did." Ethan looked down at his hands. For the first time, he didn't have a clever comeback or a sarcastic remark. He just felt something strange, a mix of guilt and admiration. He realized that while he had been showing off, Emma had been playing from her heart. Emma stood up slowly, her knees shaking. She didn't know whether to smile or cry. All she knew was that the laughter was gone. The same people who had mocked her were now speechless. As she walked back to her seat, Ethan glanced up at her. She met his eyes for just a second. There was no anger in her look, only quiet strength. That moment stayed with him long after class ended. He didn't know it yet, but the girl he had laughed at was about to teach him more about music and humility than any lesson he'd ever learned before. And, for Emma, that day was the beginning of something new. She had finally learned that even one imperfect note, played with honesty, could silence a room full of doubt. Emma couldn't stop thinking. Not perfectly, not without fear, but she had played from her heart, and somehow, that had changed everything. Ethan's laughter still echoed in her mind, but now it didn't hurt as much. It felt distant, like a memory fading into the background. She had seen the look in his eyes at the end, the surprise, the confusion, the silence. That was enough for her. She didn't need applause. She didn't need validation. She just needed that one moment of truth. The teacher approached her quietly and said, "Emma, what you did today was brave. Never forget that music isn't about showing off. It's about connecting." Emma nodded slowly, her heart warm with gratitude. As the teacher left the room, Emma stayed behind, alone with the piano. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting soft golden lines across the wooden floor. Dust floated lazily in the air. The world felt still. She pressed one note, just one. It rang out pure and calm. Then another, softer this time. Each sound felt like a small victory. She smiled to herself, remembering how scared she had been just an hour ago. But fear, she realized, was part of the music too. Every tremble, every breath, it all belonged in the melody. Outside the classroom, Ethan lingered by the doorway. He had pretended to leave with his friends earlier, but something had made him stop. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was guilt. He didn't really know. He just knew that when Emma played, something in him had shifted. He peeked inside and saw her sitting there, her back straight, her head bowed, completely lost in the piano. She didn't see him. The soft light wrapped around her like a spotlight, and her hands moved gently, gracefully. Ethan frowned, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or envy. He remembered how he had laughed, how proud he had felt when everyone followed his lead. Now that memory made him uncomfortable. He realized how cruel he must have looked. She had done nothing to deserve it. She was just trying, like anyone else. Inside the room, Emma's thoughts wandered back to her childhood. She remembered sitting on a wooden stool at home, her mother humming beside her as she practiced scales. Back then, their piano was second-hand. One key stuck every time she pressed it, and the pedals squeaked. But she loved it anyway. That was where her love for music had started. Not from lessons, not from perfection, but from the quiet evenings when her mother told her, "Play what your heart feels, not what the paper says." That voice echoed in her mind now as her fingers moved. The tune she played wasn't written anywhere. It was something she made up on the spot. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it was beautiful in its honesty. Ethan stood at the door longer than he meant to. The more he listened, the more he realized that she wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story. A story of struggle, of hope, of someone who refused to give up even when the world laughed. When she finally stopped, the silence that followed was almost magical. Ethan clapped softly without thinking. The sound startled her. She turned around quickly, her eyes wide. "Oh, sorry," Ethan said awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't mean to scare you." Emma blinked, confused. "You're still here?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, I guess I was listening," he admitted. "You're really good." She frowned slightly, unsure if he was mocking her again. "You don't have to pretend," she said. "I'm not pretending," he replied quickly. "I mean it. I was a jerk earlier. I shouldn't have laughed. That was wrong." Emma looked down at her hands. She wasn't used to people apologizing to her, especially not people like Ethan. "It's okay," she said softly. "No, it's not," he insisted. "You were brave. You played Eve, and when we laughed, I couldn't have done that." Emma smiled faintly, though she didn't look up. "You could," she said. "You just have to stop worrying about what people think." Ethan Elal laughed awkwardly. "That's harder than it sounds." "Yeah," she said. "I know." For a moment they both stood in silence. The air between them was no longer heavy with judgment or pride. It was quiet, uncertain, but honest. Ethan walked closer and glanced at the piano. "What song was that you were playing?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know. I just made it up." "You made it up?" he said, genuinely surprised. She nodded. "Music doesn't always have to come from a book. Sometimes it just comes from here." She tapped her chest gently. Ethan smiled, a real smile this time, not the fake, arrogant one he usually wore. "Maybe you could teach me that sometime," he said. Emma looked at him, puzzled but amused. "You? The best pianist in school?" He laughed softly. "Yeah, maybe I need to unlearn a few things." Emma giggled, and for the first time she saw him not as the arrogant boy who laughed at her, but as someone human, someone who could change. That afternoon marked a turning point neither of them expected. For Emma, it was the moment she realized she didn't need to prove herself to anyone. Her music spoke for her. For Ethan, it was the first time he saw music not as a competition, but as a connection. When the bell rang, they both walked out together, quietly. The sun outside was warm, the sky a soft orange. Ethan glanced at Emma and said, "You know that one note you played earlier? It was kind of magical." Emma smiled shyly. "It wasn't the note," she said. "It was the feeling behind it." Ethan thought about that as they walked down the hallway. He didn't know much about feelings. He had always hidden behind jokes and confidence. But now he wanted to understand. And somewhere deep down, Emma knew that this was only the beginning. That one moment, one note, had changed everything. For both of them. The next morning, the classroom buzzed with quiet whispers even before the bell rang. Word about Emma's unexpected performance had already spread among the students. Some said she was a genius who hid her real talent. Others said she'd just gotten lucky. But no one could deny what they had felt in that room, the strange, almost magical silence after she played that last note. Emma walked in, her backpack slung over her shoulder. eyes were a little brighter that day. She still felt nervous, but not afraid anymore. The laughter she'd heard yesterday was gone from her mind, replaced by something steadier. Confidence. It wasn't loud or showy. It was quiet, like a calm flame that burned deep inside her. Ethan was already there, sitting by the piano, tapping on the keys absent-mindedly. When he saw her walk in, he gave a small nod. "Hey," he said, not too loudly. Emma hesitated for a moment, then smiled politely. "Hey." It was awkward at first. The same person who had laughed at her was now greeting her like an equal. But there was no sarcasm in his tone today, only honesty. That was enough for her. The teacher entered a few minutes later, clapping her hands. "All right, class, let's pick up where we left off yesterday. Who'd like to start us off today?" No one spoke. Usually Ethan would jump at the chance to show off, but this time he stayed silent. Then, to everyone's surprise, Emma slowly raised her hand. "I'd like to try again," she said softly. The room fell quiet. A few students exchanged looks, whispering. "Again?" one of them murmured. Ethan leaned back, curious. He didn't say anything this time. He wanted to see what she would do. The teacher smiled warmly. "Of course, Emma. Take your time." Emma walked to the piano, her footsteps lighter than before. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her posture, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The wood felt cool under her skin, but comforting. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her mind drift away from the classroom. The first note she played was soft, so soft it barely rose above the sound of breathing in the room. But it carried weight. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling. Then another note followed, and another. The melody grew slowly, tenderly, like a voice telling a secret. Her hands moved with confidence now, not hesitation. Each note flowed into the next, forming something beautiful and haunting. The sound filled the classroom like light through a window. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere. Even the air felt different, thicker with emotion. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. He had heard countless students play before, including himself, but never like this. There was something pure in her playing, something untrained but natural, like she was breathing music instead of performing it. One by one, the students fell silent. Their whispers died. Even the teacher stopped moving, her eyes locked on Emma's fingers gliding across the keys. Emma wasn't reading from any sheet music. She wasn't following notes. She was following her heart. The melody rose and fell like waves, carrying emotions that words couldn't describe. Loneliness, hope, courage, and peace, all blending together. And then, as she pressed one specific note, a single, resonant sound, it was as if time stopped. The note rang clear and long, echoing through every corner of the room. It had a strange depth, a vibration that seemed to go beyond hearing. Ethan felt it in his chest, like the sound was alive inside him. He didn't understand how one note could feel so powerful. Around him, the other students stared, eyes wide, mouths slightly open. The teacher's eyes glistened with tears she didn't expect. She had been teaching music for years, but moments like this were rare, moments when sound became something more, something human and divine at the same time. Emma didn't rush. She let the note fade completely before moving, again. She pressed a few more keys, ending the piece gently, like a whisper disappearing into the air. Then, silence. Complete, perfect silence. For a long moment, no one moved. The sound had ended, but its presence lingered, invisible yet powerful. It was as if the room itself was still listening. Then Ethan whispered under his breath, barely audible. "Wow." Emma opened her eyes slowly. Her hands rested on the piano. She looked around, unsure of what to say or do. The silence made her nervous again, until she saw their faces. The students weren't mocking her. Their eyes were soft, amazed, almost reverent. A few even looked emotional. The teacher finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Emma, that was extraordinary." Emma blinked, unsure she had heard right. "Really?" she asked. The teacher nodded. "Music like that comes from somewhere deeper than skill. It comes from your soul." Ethan couldn't stay quiet any longer. "How did you do that?" he asked, his voice full of genuine wonder. Emma looked at him, confused. "Do what?" "That note," he said. "That one note. It felt like it was alive." Emma smiled shyly. "It's not the note," she said softly. "It's what you feel when you play it." Ethan didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, thinking. He had spent years learning scales, mastering speed and accuracy, memorizing complicated pieces, but never once had he thought about feeling. The rest of the class still sat in quiet amazement. Even after the teacher tried to move on, everyone's minds stayed with that sound. It was like a memory that refused to fade. Later that day, when class ended and the students left, Ethan stayed behind again. He walked up to the piano, stared at the keys, and pressed the same note she had played. It sounded ordinary, dull even. He tried again, pressing harder, then softer, but it never sounded like hers. He sighed, frustrated. "How?" he whispered to himself. From behind him, Emma spoke. "You can't force it," she said. Ethan turned around. She stood there, smiling gently. "You have to let the piano speak," she continued. "You just listen to it, and it listens back." Ethan looked at the keys again. For the first time, he didn't see them as just black and white patterns. He saw them as something alive, something that could feel. As Emma packed her things and left the room, Ethan sat down and pressed one note again. This time, he closed his eyes. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't powerful, but it was honest, and that, he realized, was what made hers so unforgettable. From that day on, no one ever laughed at Emma's piano skills again, because everyone in that room knew they had witnessed something rare, one note that could make even silence sing. Emma left the classroom that day with her heart still fluttering. The sound of the piano seemed to follow her down the hallway, echoing faintly in her memory. That one note, the one everyone had felt, kept playing inside her, reminding her that something had changed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being seen. Outside, the air was cool, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. Autumn leaves crunched under her shoes as she walked home, her bag heavy on her shoulder, but her spirit lighter than ever. She couldn't explain what had happened in that classroom. She hadn't planned to amaze anyone. She'd only wanted to be honest, to let the piano speak the way it always did when she was alone. At home, she placed her bag near the door and went straight to the small upright piano in the corner of their living room. It was old, the paint chipped and a few keys slightly out of tune, but to her, it was beautiful. She ran her fingers across the surface lovingly and whispered, "We did it." Her mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "How was your first day, sweetheart?" Emma hesitated, then smiled. "It was different, but good." Her mother tilted her head, curious. "You look happy." "I am," Emma said softly. "I played today, in front of everyone." Her mother's eyes widened. "You did?" Emma nodded. "And they listened." Her mother smiled, her eyes warm with pride. "I always told you, your music would find the right ears one day." Emma smiled back, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. Something had shifted inside her, a spark that refused to fade. The next morning, she arrived at school early. The classroom was empty, quiet. Sunlight spilled through the windows, landing perfectly on the piano. She sat down, pressed a key gently, and smiled. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. She began playing again, just for herself this time. The melody flowed effortlessly, as if the piano was remembering the song with her. She didn't need sheet music or guidance. Her fingers just knew where to go. What Emma didn't know was that Ethan had come in early too. He stopped at the doorway, listening quietly. The same strange feeling returned. The one that made his chest tighten, the one he couldn't name. He leaned against the doorframe, watching as her hands moved gracefully across the keys. After a few minutes, he finally spoke. "You don't even look at the keys when you play." Emma jumped slightly, startled. "You scared me," she said, laughing nervously. "Sorry," Ethan said quickly. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you, I just wanted to hear you play again." Emma looked at him curiously. "Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Because it's different. The way you play, it's not like anyone else." She smiled shyly. "That's because I don't really know how to play like everyone else." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "I never had formal lessons," she admitted. "My mom taught me what she could, but mostly I just listen to songs and play them by ear." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wah, you don't read sheet music." She shook her head. "Not much. I can, but I don't like to. I prefer to feel the song." Ethan stared at her in disbelief. He had spent years memorizing notes, counting beats, studying theory, and she, this shy girl he'd laughed at, played better than anyone he'd ever met, all by feeling. He sat down beside her, hesitant at first. "Can you show me?" Emma looked at him, amused. "Show you how to feel?" He chuckled softly. "Yeah, something like that." She nodded slowly and said, "Close your eyes." He frowned but did as she said. "Okay. Now press any note," she said. He pressed one randomly. "What do you hear?" she asked. He shrugged. "A note." Emma smiled. "No, listen again. Don't just hear it. Feel it. What does it make you think of?" Ethan stayed quiet for a moment. "It sounds lonely." She nodded. "Good. Now play another one." He did, softer this time. "And that one?" "Peaceful, I guess." Emma's eyes softened. "See? Music isn't just sound. It's emotion. Every note says something if you listen closely." Ethan opened his eyes slowly, looking at her. "That's how you do it, isn't it? You listen." She smiled. "Yes, I listen to what the piano wants to say." For a long moment, they sat there in comfortable silence. Then Emma began playing a tune again, slow, gentle, filled with emotion. Ethan watched in awe as she transformed simple keys into something alive. And that's when the revelation hit him. Emma wasn't just talented, she was gifted. She could hear the soul in music, something he'd never understood no matter how perfectly he played. When she finished, he clapped softly, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think music was about being the best, about impressing people. And now?" she asked. "Now I think it's about being honest," he replied. "You taught me that." Emma looked away, blushing. "I didn't teach you anything. You just listened." He laughed softly. "Maybe, but I'm glad I did." From that day on, things changed between them. They started practicing together after class, Ethan teaching her little bits of theory, and Emma showing him how to feel the music, instead of just playing it. The other students began to notice too, the arrogant boy and the shy girl, so different yet in perfect harmony when they played. The teacher often stopped by to listen, smiling quietly at the unlikely pair. She could see it. Something special was happening. not just in their music, but in the way they understood each other without words. One afternoon, after a long practice session, Emma stood up and said, "You know, Ethan, that first day when you laughed at me." He winced. "Yeah, I was an idiot." She smiled kindly. "It's okay. If you hadn't laughed, I might never have played that one note." Ethan looked at her in surprise. "You're thanking me?" She giggled. "Maybe a little." He laughed too, shaking his head. "You're unbelievable." But deep down he knew she was right. That single moment, the laughter, the silence, the note that stunned the room, had changed them both. And as the sun set behind the school that evening, Emma pressed one last key before leaving. The sound echoed softly, wrapping the room in warmth. Ethan listened, smiling to himself. Now he understood. That one note hadn't just changed the sound of the room, it had changed his heart. The last note faded slowly, leaving behind a silence so deep that it felt alive. No one in the classroom moved. The echo of Emma's music hung in the air like a memory that didn't want to disappear. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that follows something sacred, something too beautiful for words. Emma sat frozen at the piano, her fingers still resting on the keys. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, but everything else felt still. She didn't dare look up. She wasn't sure if she had done something amazing or foolish. All she knew was that she had played with everything inside her, her fear, her hope, her pain, her heart. Then she heard it, a single clap. It was small at first, soft and hesitant. Then another joined, and another. Before long, the whole class was clapping, not the polite kind of clapping you do after a performance, but the kind that comes from surprise and admiration. Emma's head shot up. For a second, she thought she was dreaming. The same faces that had laughed at her yesterday were now filled with awe. Even the teacher had tears in her eyes. Ethan was the first to stand. He didn't clap loudly, he just smiled. A real, genuine smile. "That was incredible," he said softly. Emma's eyes widened. "What?" "I said you were amazing," he repeated, his voice steady. "I've never heard anyone play like that." Emma blinked, unsure how to respond. The boy who had mocked her, the one who made her feel small, was now looking at her with respect. It didn't feel real. The teacher stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Emma," she said, "you didn't just play music. You created it. You made us feel something." The class nodded in agreement. A few students even whispered words like beautiful and magical. Emma's lips trembled. "Thank you," she whispered. The teacher smiled kindly. "You've reminded us all why music exists, to speak when words cannot." Emma looked around. Every face that had once carried laughter or doubt was now full of quiet admiration. She had not only changed their opinions, she had touched their hearts. But the strangest change was in Ethan. He couldn't stop thinking about the way her music had filled the room. It wasn't just the notes or her skill, it was the feeling behind it. He realized that for all his years of practicing scales and memorizing perfect performances, he had never made anyone feel what Emma just did. After class, when everyone was packing up, he walked over to her. The others left quickly, still whispering about what they had witnessed, leaving just the two of them behind. Emma was quietly closing the piano lid, and when Ethan said, "Hey," she turned, unsure what to expect. "Hi," she said softly. He rubbed the back of his neck nervously. "About yesterday," he began, his voice low. "I was awful. I shouldn't have laughed at you." Emma looked down, saying nothing. He took a step closer. "I mean it. I was stupid. I thought being good at music meant playing fast, showing off. But today, you—" He stopped, searching for the right words. "You showed me what music really is." Emma looked up at him. "It's not about showing off," she said quietly. "It's about saying something without words." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "And you said a lot." There was a moment of silence between them, not awkward, but peaceful. Ethan smiled slightly. You know, that one note you played, it did something to me. I don't even know why. It was just one note, but it felt like the whole world stopped. Emma chuckled softly. I didn't plan it, she said. I just played what I felt. He grinned. Then you felt something powerful. They both laughed quietly, and for a moment the room didn't feel like a classroom anymore. It felt like a place where something had changed. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. Golden light poured through the tall windows, touching the piano with a warm glow. It looked almost alive, as if it too understood what had just happened. Ethan sat down on the bench beside her. Can I try? He asked. Emma nodded. Of course. He pressed a key, a simple middle note. It sounded flat, ordinary. He frowned. How do you make it sound like yours? Emma smiled gently. You can't copy a feeling, Ethan. You have to find your own. He looked at her thoughtfully. And how do I do that? Stop thinking, she said, and start feeling. He closed his eyes and tried again. This time the sound was softer, warmer, not as pure as hers, but honest. He looked up and she smiled. There, she said. That's it. For the first time, Ethan understood what she meant. Music wasn't about perfection, it was about connection, about truth. A few minutes passed quietly. They played together, one note each, taking turns. No fancy melodies, no competition, just simple sounds, full of meaning. Each note they played seemed to fill the space between them with something unspoken. When they finally stopped, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Ethan leaned back, exhaling deeply. You know, he said softly, I used to think silence was awkward, but right now it feels kind of perfect. Emma smiled. That's because silence isn't empty when you fill it with music. He looked at her, and for a brief moment their eyes met. No words were needed. They both understood. The room that once echoed with laughter and mockery now held only peace. The same piano that had once been a source of fear for Emma had become her voice, strong, fearless, and true. When she finally stood up to leave, Ethan stayed seated, still staring at the piano. Emma, he said softly, you changed the way I see everything. She paused by the door. Not everything, she said with a small smile. Just the way you listen. He laughed quietly, and she left the room, her footsteps light and calm. As the door closed behind her, Ethan pressed that same note again. It didn't sound like hers, but it didn't have to. It was his now, his beginning. And in the fading light of that golden evening, the silence after Emma's song wasn't just silence anymore. It was transformation. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma at the piano. Her calm expression, the way her fingers moved so gracefully, the way one single note could change the whole room. It was haunting him in the best possible way. He had never heard anything so pure, so alive. It wasn't just music. It was truth. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the memory of his own laughter from that first day echoing in his mind. The way he had mocked her, the way everyone had followed his lead. Shame burned in his chest. He wished he could go back and undo it, but he couldn't. All he could do now was make it right. The next morning he arrived at school earlier than usual. The hallway was quiet, the air still heavy with the cool scent of morning. He stopped outside the music room. The door was slightly open, and just like the last time, soft music floated through the gap. Emma was there again, sitting at the piano, lost in her own world. Her fingers moved gently across the keys, playing something slow and peaceful, like the sound of a sunrise. Ethan stood by the door for a few moments, just listening. Then, gathering his courage, he stepped inside. Emma noticed him right away. She stopped playing and turned around. Oh, she said softly, surprised. You're early. Yeah, Ethan said, his voice uncertain. Couldn't sleep. She smiled faintly. Music in your head? He nodded. Something like that. For a moment, silence filled the room again. He wanted to speak, but the words felt heavy. He didn't know where to start. Finally, he took a deep breath. Emma, he said, his voice low. I owe you an apology. Her eyes softened, but she didn't interrupt. She just waited. I was awful to you, he continued. That first day, I laughed at you, made fun of you. I thought you didn't belong here. But I was wrong. So wrong. He looked down at his hands. I was so busy trying to look better than everyone else that I forgot what music is really about. Emma said nothing. She just watched him quietly. I guess I was jealous too, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. You play with something I don't have. You feel it. I've been playing for years, but it's always been about showing off, being perfect. You made me realize that I've been missing the point all along. Emma's fingers brushed lightly against the piano lid. You don't have to be sorry forever, Ethan, she said gently. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you learn from them. He looked up at her. I learned that I don't want to be that guy anymore. She smiled softly. Then you're already changing. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. The tightness in his chest eased a little. Emma turned back to the piano and patted the space next to her. Sit, she said. Ethan hesitated. Are you sure? Yeah, she said with a smile. You said you couldn't sleep. Let's play something together. He sat down beside her, the bench creaking slightly under their combined weight. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the old classroom lights. Emma placed her hands on the keys. I'll start, she said. You follow. She began to play a slow, tender melody, one he recognized immediately. It was the same piece she had played the day before, the one that had stunned everyone. He joined in softly, unsure at first. His notes were clumsy compared to hers, but she didn't correct him. Instead, she smiled and adjusted her rhythm to match his. They played together for several minutes, their sounds blending into something unexpectedly beautiful. It wasn't perfect. Some notes collided, others slipped, but it was real, honest. When the song ended, Ethan looked at her and said, That was incredible. Emma shook her head. That was us, she said. Two people learning to listen. Ethan chuckled quietly. You make it sound easy. It's not easy, she replied. It's brave. He looked at her, realizing how strong she really was. She had faced mockery, humiliation, and still had the courage to play again. He couldn't have done that. Emma, he said after a moment, I really am sorry. Not just for laughing at you, but for not seeing you. She tilted her head slightly. Seeing me? Yeah, he said. You were right in front of me, but I didn't notice your strength, your music, your heart. I only saw what I wanted to see, a girl to laugh at. But now, I see who you really are. Her eyes softened. Thank you, she said quietly. That means a lot. He smiled. I mean it. You're amazing. They sat there for a while saying nothing. The kind of silence that wasn't awkward anymore, but peaceful, like the silence after a good song ends. The teacher walked in a few minutes later and stopped in her tracks. Well, she said with a warm smile, you two seem to have found harmony. Emma giggled, and Ethan grinned. We're trying, he said. The teacher nodded approvingly. That's what music does. It brings people together. As she left them to practice, Ethan glanced at Emma and said, You know, I used to think I was the best pianist in school. And now? She teased. He laughed softly. Now I think I've got a lot to learn. Good, she said, her smile playful. Because I'm not done teaching you. They both laughed, and Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. peace. That day, something between them shifted for good. The wall of pride that once separated them had fallen. What replaced it was respect, understanding, and something even deeper that neither of them could quite name yet. When class ended, Ethan packed up his things, but lingered by the piano. "Hey, Emma," he said softly. "Yeah?" "Thank you for forgiving me." She smiled. "Thank you for listening." He hesitated, then added, "You know, I don't think I'll ever forget that note." She looked at him curiously. "Which one?" "The one that changed everything," he said. "The one that made me realize who you are, and who I want to be." Emma's smile grew wider, and for a moment neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to. The silence between them spoke louder than words. As Ethan left the room, he glanced back one last time. Emma was still at the piano, her fingers dancing lightly on the keys, her music filling the space again. He smiled to himself. The boy who had once laughed at her was now her biggest admirer. And maybe, just maybe, her friend. The weeks that followed changed everything for Emma, and for Ethan too. The music room, which once felt cold and intimidating to her, had become a second home. Every morning before class, she would arrive early, open the piano lid, and let her fingers dance across the keys. The sound was soft, peaceful, and filled the empty hallways like a secret sunrise. Sometimes, she played alone. Other times, Ethan would join her. They didn't need to talk much anymore. Their conversations happened through music. If she played something sad, he would quietly join in, adding a hopeful melody beside hers. If he started a tune too fast, she would slow him down with gentleness. Their connection grew not from words, but from understanding, the kind that only music could create. Their teacher often watched from the doorway, smiling. The class that once giggled and whispered now listened. No one laughed at Emma anymore. Instead, they admired her. She wasn't the shy girl they had met on her first day. She was confident, calm, and radiant when she played. One afternoon, the teacher announced that the school would hold its annual music showcase. Students would perform in front of parents, teachers, and guests from the local community. Excitement buzzed in the air, but Emma felt her stomach twist. She had never played in front of such a big audience before. The thought made her heart race. What if she made a mistake? What if people still laughed? Ethan noticed her nervous expression. After class, he caught up to her by the lockers. "You're thinking about the showcase, aren't you?" She nodded. "Yeah. I don't know if I can do it." He smiled gently. "Of course you can. You've already done the hardest part. You faced people who didn't believe in you. The rest is easy." She sighed. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one everyone expects magic from." He chuckled. "Emma, you don't make magic. You are the magic." She blushed and laughed softly. "That's cheesy, Ethan." "Maybe," he said, smiling. "But it's true." The night of the showcase arrived quickly. The auditorium was packed with people, parents holding cameras, students whispering nervously, teachers clapping softly as each performer took the stage. The lights were bright, the air filled with the faint smell of polish and flowers. Emma waited backstage, her hands shaking. She could hear the applause for the student before her fading away. Then the teacher called her name. "Next we have Emma Green." The crowd clapped politely as she walked onto the stage. Her heart thudded in her chest. The piano stood at the center under a single spotlight, gleaming like it had been waiting just for her. She sat due, won slowly, her palms sweaty, her breath unsteady. The microphone picked up even the sound of her deep exhale. Somewhere in the crowd, she caught a glimpse of Ethan. He gave her a small nod and mouthed the words, "You've got this." That one look was enough. Emma closed her eyes and let her fingers rest on the keys. She didn't think about the people, the lights, or the expectations. She thought about everything that had led her here. The laughter, the tears, the single note that had changed her life. Then she began to play. The music started softly, a melody like a whisper. It was the same piece she had played that day in class, the one that had stunned everyone. But now it was different, stronger, freer. Every note carried confidence and emotion, weaving a story that only she could tell. As she played, the noise of the audience faded. There was no sound but her music, flowing, rising, falling like waves. Her fingers glided effortlessly, every touch deliberate and full of feeling. People in the crowd leaned forward, listening intently. Even those who didn't understand classical music felt something stir in their hearts. There was sadness, beauty, and hope in every sound. Ethan watched from his seat, a proud smile on his face. He remembered the first day he had mocked her, how foolish he had been. The girl he once underestimated was now commanding the entire room with her soul. When Emma struck the final note, it rang through the hall, long, pure, and golden, the kind of sound that seemed to stop time. She let it linger, then slowly lifted her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was breathtaking. Then, as if on cue, the audience erupted in applause. People stood, clapping, cheering. Some even whistled. It was a standing ovation. Emma looked up, tears welling in her eyes. She smiled, a true radiant smile that came from the deepest part of her heart. From the crowd, E then stood first, clapping louder than anyone. Their eyes met, and he mouthed, "I told you." She laughed quietly through her tears. After the show, when most people had gone home, Emma stayed behind in the auditorium. The lights were dimmed now, and the piano sat quietly under the stage glow. Ethan came up behind her, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate from the vending machine. "You were amazing," he said, handing her one. She smiled. "Thanks. I think I finally believed in myself tonight." "You should," he said. "You made everyone in that room feel something. That's rare." She took a sip of her drink, the warmth calming her. "Do you remember the first day I played?" He groaned playfully. "Unfortunately, yes. I still cringe when I think about it." She giggled. "I do too. But maybe it had to happen that way." He raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" "If you hadn't laughed," she said softly, "I might never have found the courage to play from my heart. Sometimes being broken a little makes the music more real." Ethan looked at her, amazed at her kindness. "You're unbelievable," he said with a grin. Emma smiled back. "No, just human." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the soft hum of the lights and the distant echoes of the night. Ethan finally spoke. "You know, Emma, that one note you played, it really did change everything. Not just for you, but for me too." She turned to him. "How?" He looked at the piano. "Because before that I only heard music. But now, I feel it." Emma's smile deepened. "Then I guess the room wasn't the only thing that changed that day." He nodded slowly. "No, I did too." They both laughed softly, the sound blending with the quiet air. As they walked out of the auditorium together, Emma glanced back one last time at the piano. The same instrument that once made her nervous now felt like an old friend. She had come to school as the shy girl who was laughed at, but she was leaving that stage as something else, someone who believed in herself, who knew the power of her voice. And for Ethan, the boy who once mocked her, that single note had taught him more than any lesson or book ever could. It had taught him humility, respect, and the beauty of truly listening. That night, as they stepped out into the cool air, Ethan looked at Emma and said quietly, "You know, the world's going to remember your music one day." Emma smiled at him, her eyes shining under the streetlight. "Maybe," she said, "but I'll always remember the silence after that one note." And together they walked off into the night. 2 people changed forever by one sound, one song, and one extraordinary moment that would echo in their hearts for the rest of their lives.